We have huge breaking news here at Sky Sports News, because following a hearing of UEFA on the 22nd of January, Manchester City are to be punished for breaking financial rules in football, and they have been banned from all UEFA competition for the 2 seasons after this one.
Friday, 14th of February, Valentine's Day. Manchester City have just received notice of a ban from UEFA, 2 years out of the Champions League and a €30 million fine.
This is a case initiated by UEFA, prosecuted by UEFA, judged by UEFA. With this prejudicial process now over, the club will pursue an impartial judgment as quickly as possible and will therefore commence proceedings with the Court of Arbitration for Sport. That statement just into us from Manchester City.
The ban comes in the wake of UEFA's claims that Manchester City overstated its sponsorship revenue in its accounts and in the break-even information submitted to UEFA between 2012 and 2016. They also claim that the club failed to cooperate in the investigation.
Some of these players are coming into the best period in their career. This might be the best chance, maybe the only chance they have of challenging for the Champions.
None of them players should be even thinking about leaving Man City. Think of other teams who've had sanctions. You think of Juventus, what Buffon did there when they went down and they stayed there and was loyal to the club. That's what these players should be doing, really.
It is now Friday the 21st of February and the dust has started to settle. In this episode, we trace the last 7 days in the history of Manchester City Football Club and attempt to unpick the threads, looking at the impact of the Champions League ban on the fans, on the club, on the players, on the Premier League and on European football in general. It's Friday the 14th, and because the ruling from UEFA came out so late in the day, the only real response we've had has been a statement that's come out from Manchester City.
It's been an incredible few minutes, hasn't it, with this statement coming out from UEFA. But within minutes of that statement coming out, Manchester City making their own statement. And as you can imagine, Jim, they are not happy at all. A very strongly worded statement.
Now, that statement has been markedly bullish. The club say that they're disappointed but not surprised by the verdict. They've described the process as prejudicial, and they've been very quick to say that they're going to take this case to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. The actual wording of the statement is very, very barbed. They kick off by saying,
Manchester City is disappointed but not surprised by today's announcement by the UEFA adjudicatory chamber.
And they've also said that they always anticipated the ultimate need to
seek out an independent body and process to impartiality to consider the comprehensive body of irrefutable evidence in support of its position.
So they're making it very obvious that they're accusing UEFA of bias in this regard. They've also made it very clear that they are unhappy with the process that there's been going on here, and they've mentioned a number of times a number of leaks that have been made to the press, and they've suggested that UEFA have prejudged them in this whole situation. But then the closing paragraph is the real banger, where you get a little bit of everything.
Simply put, as far as Manchester City are concerned, this is a case initiated by UEFA, prosecuted by UEFA, and judged by UEFA.
So it's very clear then that Manchester City are going to take UEFA on.
The club will pursue an impartial judgment as quickly as possible and will therefore, in the first instance, commence proceedings with the Court of Arbitration for Sport at the earliest opportunity.
But as of now, we're going to have to wait for time to pass just so that we know a little bit more about how the various aspects of this are going to play out. It's now Monday the 17th. We've had the whole weekend to let the news cycle turn over. And there's understandably been some interesting discussions about what's gone on in the media. We now have clarity on the precise details of the crimes that Manchester City are said to have committed, as Tariq Panja of the New York Times explains in this interview with TRT World.
To simplify it, it's kind of nothing to do with the finances as such, i.e. the details within the finance. What it's to do with are the revelations from the Football Leaks documents, which suggest that Manchester City didn't tell the truth. So to really simplify it, they're being accused of misleading UEFA, the investigators and other licensors over a number of years. So whatever the level of detail in the accounts are, which are what normally count when it comes to FFP, this is more of a disciplinary dispute over misleading investigators, misleading UEFA, not telling the truth. That's probably the simplest way of putting this.
As for the specific details of those crimes that were committed, Kieran Maguire has spelled those out in conversation with Jim White on Sky Sports.
Looking at the commentary from UEFA, it appears to indicate that they thought that Manchester City were overstating their income. So that's one way of ensuring that they satisfy the rules. Now, what's happened with Manchester City is that their commercial income, that went up from £65 million in 2011, and by 2016, it had almost trebled. I think that UEFA have taken the view that some of the contracts signed by Manchester City were with friendly parties and were perhaps not at market rates, therefore overstating their income and allowing them nominally to satisfy the FFP rules.
Tariq Panja also offered a clearer timeline of what is going to happen in the immediate aftermath of this UEFA ban.
Yeah, they've looked at this stuff, and from what I understand, investigators feel, look, we've looked at this stuff and we feel that they have cheated. However, the way the panel works is that they will all meet. They all met, I believe, 2 Fridays ago, and this is the general feeling. However, the way the panel works is that the person who has the final say is the chairman of the panel, which is the Belgian Prime Minister, Yves Le Terme. If he was to go with a consensus view, what the investigators said and submit this is, yes, he believed Man City have cheated and should be banned. However, that submission has yet to be made, and I believe it's going to happen this week.
But there's also been some interesting discussion about the impact that this will have on the players at Manchester City. So on Sunday, in the Sunday supplement on Sky TV, we heard Mark Ogden talk a little bit about the impact that this is going to have on the squad at Manchester City.
I think the players is the issue because, players will just look after themselves at the end of the day, and players can talk about loyalty and how much they kiss the badge and love the club and what have you. If they feel that their career is being damaged by being at a club that can't offer them what they want, they'll find a way to get out. And City's big players, people like Raheem Sterling, Kevin De Bruyne, are on long-term contracts, so there's no way that City would let these players leave easily. But if they were in a situation where they're not in the Champions League for 2 years, they can't generate the income to pay these players. The players are all mid to late 20s, none of them in the Champions League yet, and if they stay at City for the next 2 years, they're not going to win it there.
Over at The Athletic, however, Manchester City correspondent Sam Lee offered a slightly different account of how the Manchester City players might respond. Here he is talking on the Lead podcast.
Over the weekend, obviously The Athletic, we scrambled a lot of our top writers to find out these kind of questions, and a lot of the information that came back from sources close to the team and agents close to the team was that, there will be some players, and even some of the nicest players, even some of the most PR-friendly players, they will not want to stick around. And I think it would also be unfair to speculate, but Leroy Sané was a player who was most likely to leave anyway. David Silva already announced his intention to leave anyway. He has spent 10 years at City by the end of his contract. His contract runs out in the summer, so he's leaving. There's been a bit of speculation about Sergio Aguero. Maybe he would use this as an opportunity to get out. But on the other hand, you've actually got the strange step, the remarkable step of one of the players' agents, so Raheem Sterling's agent, A.D. Ward, has actually gone on the record to say that Raheem Sterling will be staying. Apparently Kevin De Bruyne, probably the other star player on the team, he's kind of said that he's happy at City and this isn't a factor to him. So it basically depends on the individual, really.
What about Pep Guardiola? Well, Sam Lee continues.
There were always rumours anyway, based on the fact that they were having a disappointing season in terms of the points gap to Liverpool. So people were putting 2 and 2 together and speculating that he would go. I think, but I must say that the sources I trust most around Manchester City, the sources closest to him, they've always said he will stay. He will see out his contract at least, which again, that runs until summer 2021. So there's another 18 months on that.
And what about that biggest question of all? What will the financial impact be on Manchester City if this ban is upheld?
UEFA income is critical. It can be worth up to £100 million a year in prize money alone. On top of that, you're hosting home fixtures in the Champions League, which can be worth another 30 or 40. And of course, sponsors will have clauses which say if you're not participating in UEFA competitions, then they'll be able to impose penalties as well. So I think in terms of Manchester City satisfying future years of FFP, that's going to make it even more difficult if they're losing around about £150 million worth of income a year.
It's now Tuesday the 18th, and there is one set of voices that have remained conspicuous in their absence so far throughout all of this, and that's the fans. I'm joined by David Mooney, creator of the Blue Moon podcast and the host of the Athletics' Why Always Us podcast. David, I wonder if you could describe the moment that you learned about the ban.
I was playing football on Friday night, so I was on the pitch completely unaware of anything happening. And just out of nowhere, we finished the game, we're wandering off back towards the changing room, stop off, get a drink, that sort of thing. And then I got into the changing rooms, got my phone out, and I can't say the exact number, but it was over 2,000 WhatsApp notifications. And so immediately I thought, oh, something's happened here. Then it turns out to be this from City, and I don't really remember feeling anything one way or the other, really. It was one of those situations where you kind of thought, well, it's been that news story that's been on the cards for about 2 years or so now. It's just nice to have a decision, you know what I mean?
What's your response been to this scenario? Do you feel sympathy for the club, or are you just upset that they've mismanaged things so badly off the field?
There is all sorts of kind of how I feel about it. Let's strip it back. There's so many things that could have happened that us as fans, we don't know what it is that the club have done. There is still the entire possibility that the club are completely innocent of everything. They say the emails are taken out of context that Der Spiegel leaked. They say that they have been part of a clear and targeted agenda from UEFA for all of this time. It is perfectly possible that that is true. In which case, you have to say, well, okay, very sorry, City, you've been caught up in all this, then, you shouldn't have been caught up in this like you have been. On the flip side, it's equally as possible, and a lot of people would say that if City haven't broken any rules, and they've certainly probably bent the rules, it's equally as possible that they have been either unknowingly breaking UEFA's rules, which I think is unlikely given that they've painted it as a stitch-up, or they have been knowingly breaking UEFA's rules and have basically been found out by the football leagues. Whichever one of those camps you fall under, I actually find it quite difficult to have sympathy with City, because if it is a position of ignorance, then they should be doing more to understand the laws that they should be abiding by for the UEFA competitions. If it's not, then they've been hoodwinking us all this time, because they've effectively been saying, oh yeah, no, we are passing financial fair play. And yet it's been artificially inflated in, I think it was the Etihad sponsorship that was the key one, in which case they've just been lying to the fans. And so you kind of go, well, why would I have sympathy with you if you've been caught out doing this? And if their defence is on the back of that, well, all these other clubs are doing it as well. Well, that doesn't absolve City of any blame in this. It just means that UEFA should look into some other clubs as well. If their other defence is that the process from UEFA is flawed, they've said all along that this is a case that has been brought by UEFA, tried by UEFA, and then judged by UEFA. Well, I mean, you're not going to garner much sympathy by knowingly breaking the rules but then not being punished for it because UEFA's process was flawed. That's not going to help anybody out here. So I'm just kind of wondering who wins out of all of this. It's a complete mixture of emotions. I don't know really what I think if truth is being told. I don't really have that much sympathy for City.
Do you think there's a sense that the fan base are responding to this ban in a unified way, or do you think there's a full gamut of reactions going on here?
I'd say my reaction there is probably in the minority. There's a very big problem with City fans and UEFA that goes back years and years and years. Financial fair play is a small facet of that relationship. The two sides have never really seen eye to eye. City qualified for the Champions League in 2011-12. That was their first season in it. And I remember fans being really excited to get to the Etihad and get to games and get to watching it with the Champions League music. And it must have only been, 3 seasons later that there's already talk of booing the anthem. 3 or 4 seasons down the line, they are booing the anthem. There's a real underhand feeling around everything that UEFA was doing without going into too many issues. There was issues over City being late to a game, the fine for that being more than, I think it was Mario Balotelli being racially abused in Moscow, although I might be getting my players and my incidents of racism mixed up. It could have been Yaya Toure in Moscow, or it could have been Balotelli in Kiev. There's so many of those incidents where City felt that things hadn't been punished. The club didn't help themselves with the prices at which tickets were set at. City's fan base is traditionally very working class, and it doesn't have the kind of fallback that a lot of the European giants have, where people will just go and show up to Champions League games where they're not normally season ticket holders. The tourist element of fans isn't really there for City. And then on top of all of that, financial fair play comes in, and it looks, from a City fan's point of view, as an attack on the club and a way of saying, we don't want you here, so you're not going to spend your money to get into our closed shop. And you put all those feelings together into a big melting pot. Throw in the fact that I feel like the language that's come out around City, from City as well as from coverage in the press, and certainly with the way UEFA have been speaking as well, you kind of say, well, it kind of weaponises this us against them feeling that is being generated. So I say a lot of City fans are actually quite dissatisfied with UEFA and UEFA competition.
It's now Wednesday the 19th, and The Athletic's Matt Slater has just published a piece titled Behind the Story, Manchester City's Long Road to CAS2, tracing the history between the first run-in that City had with the Court of Arbitration for Sport, CAS1, and their upcoming hearing, imaginatively titled CAS2. It's becoming increasingly obvious that this disagreement is going to carry huge ramifications for the sport of football. But for many journalists, the ruling came completely out of the blue, as Matt himself admits.
I should probably explain that it was a personal surprise insofar as about 3 months ago, a colleague of mine and I wrote a story for The Athletic that predicted City would not get a ban, that UEFA didn't have the stomach for this fight, and that City would, possibly only face a fine. So, I would have to hold my hand up there, mea culpa time, and say that was the wrong call. It would be fair to say that I was becoming less and less sure of myself as time passed. I actually went full circle on this. If you'd have asked me 6 months ago, a year ago, 14, 15 months ago, when the original story came out in Der Spiegel, I was absolutely convinced that UEFA would throw the book at City and City would be in a lot of trouble. I, as I've just mentioned, managed to persuade myself otherwise for a time being. And there were good reasons for that I possibly can't go into all of them. There are a number of good reasons why both City were very, very confident, and, I picked up that confidence. But look, City were wrong. I was wrong. So we are where we are now, and, the impact has been huge.
What do you think the long-term impact of this ruling is going to be on UEFA in particular?
It's a very 21st century issue, this, I think. We are talking about Western rules-based systems that have served us pretty well here for sort of 65 years in UEFA's case, coming up against sovereign wealth funds, coming up against almost unlimited wealth, coming up against how nations want to brand themselves, soft power. And there's unbelievable strain there. Financial fair play was, I think, a well-intentioned attempt to rein in overspending and address some of the more unsustainable bits of European football, but has flaws in it. Had flaws in it from the beginning, and those flaws have become more and more apparent. City feel aggrieved that they are being picked on. Others will look at City and go, no, you've gone too far. You've paid lip service to these rules. You've willfully and consciously subverted these rules, so you're going to get what's coming to you. And there's all manner of potential collateral damage here. So, the impact could be remarkable. Equally, I think we should admit that a deal would serve many parties here, and that perhaps there's wiggle room built into this original sanction. 2 years could become one. Would City get themselves into a position where they feel that honour is spared by serving 1 year out of Europe? I don't know. Let's see.
So do you think that this approach by UEFA is a last-ditch attempt to save FFP and to save the current structures of governance in European football?
Yes, I think that's an absolutely fundamental part of this. There is also, I think, an acknowledgement that perhaps FFP still, in its kind of current guise, there are so many holes, there are so many contradictions that City are going to actively explore now and try and pick away at, that it's probably due a reboot, a rebrand, a sort of freshening up anyway. That, I think, is probably a good thing. I don't think it's necessarily going to get City out of the hole they're currently in, and neither should it. They're in the dock right now. They have serious allegations to face, and jumping up and down and pointing at others is perhaps, I don't think it should completely exonerate them. These rules have been in place. City have signed up to them. City have entered the competitions. They've banked UEFA's checks. And it's right that they should answer these pretty fundamental prima facie accusations. So yes, I think UEFA had to defend themselves. I think UEFA also had to address the fact that regardless of how you feel about FFP, there certainly at face value appears to be a attempt to deceive and acting in bad faith that is apparent in those emails. And for that alone, there needs to be some kind of redress.
It's Thursday the 20th, the morning after City took on West Ham United at the Etihad and comfortably turned them over thanks to goals from Rodri and Kevin De Bruyne. This was the first public appearance of the team since news of the ban broke, and Jonathan Smith, Manchester City correspondent for Goal.com, was there to see it unfold. Jonathan, I wonder whether or not you got a sense of Pep Guardiola's mood in the press conference before and after the game.
Well, there was no press conference before the game, which would normally be unusual, but it was just the circumstances with this game being postponed. West Ham didn't do a press conference either, so both clubs had fulfilled their media obligations, so there was no press conferences. So it was a bit of a strange game because in the press box, I think the mood was waiting to see what Pep Guardiola would say after the game. And it was quite interesting to see him. He came out very relaxed and very emphatic about his opinion about everything.
So you said before the game that after the match you would speak about the ban, FFP, UEFA. What would you like to say?
Ask me.
Okay. Firstly, what is your reaction to it?
It's not finished because he believes it's unfair. So we're going to appeal and we're going to wait. So only we can do, the people is on the pitch to continue do what we have done the last 4 years and try to win games and focus in that until the end of the season. And after that, we're going to wait.
He'd spoken to the club and he'd been assured that they were confident that a decision would go in their favour, and also there was no question that he is staying at Manchester City, and I think that should be very reassuring for fans and also for his players.
Did you speak to any of the players after the game, or were they on best behaviour in front of the media?
Yeah, I think there was an instruction to avoid the subject completely. Kevin De Bruyne was obligated to speak to the TV, and he was very diplomatic in his response.
Well, obviously we were on holiday when the statement happened, and I think we came back and we played football when the situation is what it is, but we came back, trained like normal, and in the end for us nothing really changed. We just play the games that we have, and even today we give a good performance, and we still have a lot to play for with the 2 cups and the Champions League. So well, let's hope we can find our rhythm as quick as possible and win some titles in the end of the year.
The message from them is going to be clear that it's all about football. They're not going to get drawn into anything like this, which is not great for us, but it's completely understandable.
Do you think the game itself was indicative of how City are going to respond to this ban? Is it simply business as usual in Manchester?
I think from the club's point of view, it is business as usual. They want to keep the players focused. Pep wants to stay focused. They've obviously got this huge tie against Real Madrid coming up in a few days' time, so they can't afford to be distracted because the Premier League's gone. I don't think there's any question that Liverpool are going to win that title. Certainly at City, I don't think they have any realistic ambitions of a big blow-up from Liverpool. So the Champions League now represents such an important part of the season. They have to throw everything at this game against Real Madrid. It couldn't be a much tougher last 16 tie. So they just can't afford to be distracted. So they just have to put everything to the back of their mind and focus on being ready for that.
As has been so often the case this season, and it's become a little bit of a cliche, but the pundits were remarking on the empty spaces at the stadium last night. Do you think that this lack of support suggests that the fans are already voting with their feet when it comes to Manchester City?
Yeah, I don't think we'll really know how City fans truly feel until that second leg against Real Madrid. I think there'll be a big reaction to UEFA. They'll want to make a statement, but there are a few fans online, on Twitter and social media, saying that they're not happy with how this has played out. Even if an appeal is won, it would look like the club's reputation is going to be tarnished on the back of this. But I think the empty seats and things like that I think that was probably a reflection of the game. It was, like we say, the Premier League's title race is over. It was a rearranged game. Traffic, weather was horrible, and I just think a few people decided to stay at home.
Which brings us to Friday the 21st of February. It's been a full week since UEFA announced Manchester City would be banned from European tournaments for 2 seasons. In many respects, we are none the wiser when it comes to knowing what the future holds for the club. All we can do is speculate.
What does it mean? I mean, wow. I think it means we're at a crossroads moment.
It's not going to be easy to take.
My gut instinct says that this will go to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and partly because of UEFA's process, I suspect what will happen is that City's ban will probably be knocked down to 1 season, and they'll have a season out of the Champions League. Then on in, I honestly don't know.
2 years away from Champions League football is the pinnacle of football, pinnacle of club football, and a lot of them won't want to be without that. 2 years in a football player's career is huge.
Look, people have been predicting a Super League for years and years and years, and eventually it's going to come to pass, or something a lot like a European Super League. I don't know when, but it's starting to look inevitable.
My big worry is retrospective points deductions from the Premier League. This period dates from, I think it's 2012 to 2016, which means that their 2012 title should be okay, but the title in 2014 could be under threat. And I think as soon as that happens, if there were to be a point where the Premier League were to deduct points from City's season in 2014, then I think that opens a whole can of worms.
Things are going to change. How things change and how far they change, I don't know. Because some of the things that have happened in the last 10, 20 years, you couldn't have predicted, and people have made all manner of predictions about things that are wrong. And having predicted that this story would go one way, I'm going to try and stay out of the predictions game. But I just feel that it's inevitable that this case, the conversation about the future of European club competitions from 2024, the conversations that are ongoing about media rights and how best to do that, and competitive balances within leagues, and, as I say, this sort of sense of the haves and the have-nots, it's all going to go in the mix, and what comes out will be very, very different. And we're at a crucial time in European club football.
The other question then, of course, becomes what do the owners think of what potentially happens? Is the brand at this point, whatever their intentions of owning a good brand, is the brand at this point now too tainted for them to be a part of and to have a good image with? Has there been too much reputational damage for them to salvage anything from this? And will it take too long for them to be able to do that? Or is it worth putting in, another however much money to rebuild the brand from scratch? I don't know.
It's not just City, though. The fallout for football in general could be huge if this is upheld. I mean, you look back at the incident with Carlos Tevez and when he went to West Ham, and how that rumbled on for years with Sheffield United and the implications. We're at a stage now where we don't know, is that 5th place going to be enough to qualify for Champions League? At the moment, it would seem that way, but that could change. It's opened up a real can of worms, this decision.
Ultimately, my big feeling about all of this is that I just miss the days. Maybe it's naive of me, but I just miss the days when football was football and I could go at the end of the week or the middle of the week, enjoy the game and go home and talk about what happened on the pitch. For the last few years, by virtue of being a City fan, I have apparently had to know the inside outs of football business dealings and understand how spreadsheets work. Listen, I have to pay somebody to do my own tax. I can't do this. I'm not good enough to be able to work out what City are spending where and when, whether that's compliant with the laws or not. That shouldn't be on me as a football fan to have to work that out. And if the ultimate price of me not having to do that is to watch my football team play with worse players in a lower league, then so be it. There's almost a relief that comes with that on that front. You won't find many City fans that would be happy with that. I'm not sure entirely I would be happy with that, but it would at least allow me to focus on the football.
David Mooney is the creator of Blue Moon Podcast and the host of The Athletic's Why Always Me podcast. You can find all of Matt Slater's writing about Manchester City and the intricacies of football finance over at The Athletic. Jonathan Smith is the Manchester City correspondent for Goal.com. This episode was produced by Josh Schneiderweiler. I'm John Mackenzie. Thanks for listening to Football Today. If you enjoyed this podcast, why not rate or review it on iTunes, or share an episode with a friend. See you next time.